Hi, thank you for joining us again for another session with Peaceful Passages. I'm the founder and educator, Theresa Bates, and I am honored again to host another program with my good friend and mentor, David Zinner. And we were talking in our break that he's a man with many hats. And those of us that hold any leadership position, whether in a church, business, or a mom at home, we have many different hats. And David's been one of the forefront leaders in the Hever Kadisha end-of-life practices. And today I asked him if he would cover a lot of the topics of Shiva. There's a lot of things that I have learned about Shiva, but there's so much to learn. And I'm just touching the iceberg on what I already know. So I'm going to lean a little bit more on David because this is one of the topics that he absolutely loves to talk about and share. So I want to welcome David to the show.
Thanks, Theresa. Yeah, Shiva is a really interesting Jewish tradition. Shiva is a Hebrew word which means seven, and it's commonly used to describe what happens after someone dies and is buried, and the community comes together to comfort the family for 7 days. Mm-hmm. The problem is that it's never 7 days. First of all, we don't do Shiva on Shabbat. So that 1 day is already taken away. So it's only 6 days. And second of all, we only do Shiva usually in the afternoon on the day the person is buried. They're often buried in the morning. So half the day is already gone. And on the last day, we get up in the morning and we may walk around the block, symbolizing the end of Shiva. So we don't do that full day either. And just to make it even more complex, if you're doing Shiva and a major Jewish holiday occurs, you stop the Shiva and you don't restart it. So the concept of calling it 7 is a good theory, but the practice is to be there for the family, to provide comfort to them, to listen to them, to hear their stories, to have a service at the house with the family, and pray with them. And it's a really important way to help the family at their most vulnerable.
Well, I think one of the things that when I was in the school that I learned from, when I started really understanding the concept of Shiva, I think we in our society really have fallen short and taken the time that we need to actually process the grief and to work through it. Because a lot of my experience after somebody passes away, we're so quickly wanting to, okay, I'm sorry your loved one passed away. Here's a funeral, get back in life, just start moving forward. And when I was in classes and learned just the tip of the iceberg on the Shiva aspect of, wait, just stop, hold on a minute. Is 7 or even 3 days too long to stop and really acknowledge that your loved one passed away, and to have a safe place to grieve the loss of your loved one? And it's hard because grief it's like dynamite. It's happy, it's sad, it's guilt, it's relief. And sometimes when your loved one passes away, there's that relief going, oh my gosh, the challenge of caring for them for that long. And then when they actually can breathe, not having them there in that Shiva time. I've experienced a couple times with walking people through this. They have that relief, but then they feel guilty, and then they feel mad because now their loved one's not there, and now they don't know what to do, so they're frustrated. So it's all these emotions that happen in this period of time, and giving them that 3, 4, 5, sometimes the full 7 days minus Shabbat, encompassing around Shabbat, giving them that time to just breathe. We miss it.
Yeah, and Judaism has this really interesting approach. Shiva is only part 1 of the mourning process, right? Part 2 is Shloshim, which means 30. And so for the first 30 days, we take on the mourners take on some additional burdens. And then at the end of the 1 year period, we remember them, the person who died again. And 4 times during the year for Yizkor, we remember them. So mourning doesn't end at 30 days or 7 days.
Right.
And grief certainly doesn't end. And so the importance of Shiva is that it helps get the process going, and it sort of alerts the community, this is a family that's going to need some care. So don't abandon them after the first 7 days. Stay with them. Call them up on holidays and on birthdays, and offer to have them come over for dinner. And just because the intense first 7 days is over doesn't mean you should ignore them the rest of the time.
Right. Well, it's interesting because that's one of the things that we've learned is there's people process the death at different intervals. There's some people that can go through it really quickly. There's some that don't. Some can respond well, some don't. And it's interesting, again, leaning with what I learned through my Jewish brothers and sisters, having that initial block of time, like you said, starts the healing process. And what I've learned on the flip side, not blaming any particular group in society, when we don't have that block of time, even for 2 or 3 days, and we want to ignore that the death actually happened and try to move on too quickly, that grief festers. And we tend to bring that with us a lot longer instead of acknowledging it, saying, ow, my loved one passed away. That really hurts. And having that process start, it seems that the steps afterwards, not that they're easy or they're gone, but when you can acknowledge to say, yeah, they're gone, I have to reevaluate and have people that are trusted that can help you through that. So you can be happy and sad, and whatever happens, when you're with them during Shiva, if they say something to you that you've never heard, keep quiet. Because I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. Well, that's okay. You're my mentor.
So let's go back a step, okay?
Okay.
So Shiva is usually observed in the person's home whose relative died, right? Okay. Now, not everybody's home is conducive to having crowds of people come there. So some people will use a community center or a synagogue to do Shiva. But one of the points of Shiva is that your neighbors, your friends, your community is coming to comfort you in person. And the Jewish tradition is that when you walk into the Shiva house, that you do not greet the mourners. You wait for them to speak to you first. Mm-hmm. And if they speak to you, fine. If they sit there in silence, you sit there in silence, right? If they want to talk about sports, you talk about sports. If they want to talk about the person who died, that's fine. You talk about the person who died. If you're finding the conversation doesn't move smoothly and you think that they're open to it, you can, the kinds of things you want to say to them are, tell me about your father, for example, if the person's father died, or you can tell them some kind of remembrance about the person if you interacted with them. It's okay to have a conversation. It's good to have a conversation, but you have to sort of suss out, where is the person at? What's going to be comforting for them? And the other part of this is there's usually a prayer service in conjunction with Shiva. For the most traditional, there would be one in the morning and the evening. People who are traditional but not so traditional, maybe just in the evening. And those are really interesting services because they may only take half an hour. And then what would often happen is people would then, go eat food that people had brought. And then it would be very noisy and, it would be hard to hear. And, people would walk up to the mourners and say something, and the mourners would get asked the same question or have the same comment 10 times in a row. So one of the evolutions of what happens in the Shiva is that instead of the service and then people going and eating food, we would stop the service in the middle and open it up for the mourners to talk about the person who died and for people to ask questions about their life and hear more stories as part of the service, not separate for the service, so that we maintain that sort of that envelope of paying attention and listening. And that can be very helpful because often a mourner might say, I wrote out this whole eulogy, but I didn't give it because I wasn't ready. Right? Well, this is a time when they can do that. Or there might be a grandchild who wants to say something, and this is a time when they can say something without, in a big, giant facility in a smaller setting, they might be willing to talk about it. So there's a lot of opportunities here.
Right. Well, it's a place where they're a little bit more comfortable because maybe they don't want to be in front of a whole lot of people, right. But, they want to read it and, if by chance, intimacy in their own home. But what I was referring to was, if you're having a conversation with the mourner and the mourner shares something with you, then, that's not, and it's a private thing. That's what you don't share. But also,
I misunderstood you because you're right. Yeah. You don't share that with other people.
Right.
And you can give mourners feedback about what they just shared with you.
Right. And because maybe they shared something, that happened years ago and that nobody knows. And that's one of the things that you don't share. But, there's also times where, from my understanding, is we should have an idea of somebody in our community that if we've gone to the community for a period of time, that, whether the death is sudden or expected, on how that person is going to handle it. If they're going to handle it fairly well, then, you might have a couple people kind of filter in. But there's also times where you know that they're not going to handle it well. And if they're not going to handle it well, there's definitely things to put into place, to have people, around, not hovering over them, but always kind of stay around in the peripheral. And if there's a situation that happens that you can't handle, you know who to call for backup. Because you have no idea. People are people, they react differently.
Yeah, and that's another good point is, it would be typical that there would be more than one mourner. There might be a couple with children and, aunts and uncles or cousins or siblings, and each one might react differently.
Right.
You know, one of the things that's interesting is that children are often sort of ignored in situations like this. Like a grandparent dies, you know, the children are told to go up and watch television or something like that. Or
right, get out of the way. Yeah.
Right. And that's really unfortunate because, you know, children grieve and children's voices are important. One of the things that I do when I lead a Shiva service, I ask if there are children in the house. And if there are, I say, we'd love to have them come and join us. And then before I even start the service, I ask them to talk about the person who died, probably usually a grandparent, right? And tell us your favorite story about your grandparent. Where did they, you know, what did they do that they weren't supposed to do? You know, you know, where did they take you out for ice cream? You know, anything. And the goal of that is really interesting. The goal is to make everyone cry, right? The goal is to get people listening and empathizing and really feeling the loss, right? And you know, the kids can do that. They can say stuff that really brings out the emotions for everyone.
Right. Well, it also, you know, depends on the age of the child,
right?
Because you know, if it's a 5-year-old, they're like, and I'm. You know, maybe it was the walk down the street or the time where they took you to ice cream. But I tell you, teenagers can say the wildest things, but also if they were really close to maybe a grandparent or a parent and you bring them in and incorporate them in and you ask them that particular question, it's like, well, I remember when this, and this. And they are not as guarded as we have learned as adults to be, and how to say it, when to say it, what to say, what not to say. And, you know, because teenagers generally are fearless. They'll just say whatever they're going to say. Some are bolder, some are not. But to have that intimate, generally quiet story of remembering not the big things that they did in life, but the small little intricate things, because this is the part of the family that's going to be affected the most.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad you brought that out.
Yeah, it's well said. And you know, the person leading the service, right, leading the prayer service, has a responsibility to sort of not only set the tone, but to try and be as inclusive and to recognize who the mourners are, right, beforehand. You don't just walk in and say, okay, let's start the service at 7:00. You know, you get there at 6:30 and you interact with the family a little bit. You meet all the people and, you know, who and you hear some of the stories in advance. And then you say, you know, Julie, you told me this story earlier, but do you want to repeat the story for everyone? Because I thought it was really moving, right? So it helps if the leader, again, just as when we talk about Tahara, when we talk about other things where the leader is critical, if the leader knows a little bit and is willing to sort of put themselves out there to make the whole experience a more meaningful one. Right.
Well, one of the things, and I've experienced not once, not twice, but several times in Shiva. And I'm going to lean on you a little bit more for your expertise and guidance here. How is it different when it's a leader of a community that experiences the loss and you're there at their Shiva house? Because sometimes leaders want people there. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're not comfortable. But how can you walk us through when it's the leader of the community? And because there is, like I said, there's that balance that, because there are times I know when I was going through some hard things that I didn't want what I felt out there, but I really did need the people around me just to come and say, I'm here, I got your back. So can you touch on that for me?
Yeah, it's there's a sort of pride of leadership, like you create this bubble around yourself saying, I've got everything under control. I don't need anyone's help. I'm the leader, until you experience a death. And then all of a sudden, you're really not the leader anymore. You're really the person who can benefit from the community support. And to make that transition is not always so easy for people.
Right.
And, for some people, they can't do it. They just can't. They can't just drop their defenses and accept help, But it's important for us to offer it. If they accept it, wonderful. It is a very different experience when a leader or an important person in the community has a relative die, and the community response can be like overwhelming. Instead of getting 30 or 40 people in your living room for prayers, you could get 120 people, and they could be out the front door, and so then you get into questions of scheduling and how do we spread the wealth, that kind of thing, or change the location, so it's more convenient. So again, this is the kind of thing where we have to be smart how we do things. Think about what could happen, and based on our experience, how we respond to it better.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting when the different people in the different areas had told me about that struggle. I just tried to encourage that not to make a big deal out of it, but maybe send a card a week later. And then a couple weeks later, just let them know that you're there, because it's important. Because sometimes when we want to be there, and that's the beauty of being in a Shiva house, is you let the mourner take the lead. And it's hard for us to be quiet. I know sometimes I have a hard time being quiet. Anyway, but it's important to let them take the lead. You don't have to say anything. The mourners there know if you're there, and they know if you're not. And those that tend to show up and just sit there and sometimes be quiet, or wow, their kitchen needs cleaned, and just gets up and goes cleans the kitchen and serves. That will build, from what I'm understanding, build the community stronger, because the time that they were the most in pain, the time that they were most vulnerable, you're coming along. You're not telling them what they did, what they didn't do. Was it right? Was it wrong? Could they do it different? You're just there, and let's clean the kitchen or throw the trash away. You're there supporting them and just coming alongside to say, this really hurts. There's nothing to say to make it better. I just want to come alongside and be a shoulder. And
so a lot of really, really good points, can I babysit for you? Can I cut your grass? Can I walk the dog? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I especially am sensitive to food issues, right? Like people like to bring food to the house in Jewish tradition, but they end up bringing lots of desserts, and then some of us don't need to eat any more desserts, or they don't have enough room in the freezer for all the desserts.
Right.
So what I recommend to people, instead of bringing food like that instead you serve meals to the family. It's really an interesting experience. You might have 2 or 3 people who make things, but then, one person, brings the food over, serves the food, stands there and talks to the family, and then, puts the leftovers away for them and washes the dishes. While the family goes into the other room to start the prayer service. That kind of, that's so qualitatively different than dropping off a cake, right? And the family will remember it. It's amazing what families can remember. Who helps them out. They're just so appreciative. And you just get this warm feeling that you've done something important for them.
Yeah. Well, I know our time is getting a little close. And again, leaning on your years of expertise in the last couple minutes, what is the biggest benefit that you see the importance of having and respecting Shiva and incorporating this in our communities?
Yeah, the comfort to the families to know that the community is there supporting them, and having a place to not only pray together but to talk about the person who died. That just can't be calculated, because until now, the family, even if they did a eulogy, it's really been, the focus has been on the person who died. But once the burial happens, the focus moves to the mourners, and they're going to need comfort and support, and this is a great way to do it.
Yeah.
One of the things that we didn't talk about was that just like we talked about when we did Shmirah, sometimes families can't get to Shiva, and so especially since COVID, there have been remote Shivas where people do it virtually, or blended Shivas where people can, dial in and participate virtually as well as in person. And that enables people who are unable to travel or have conflicts or from other cities, to be able to participate.
Right.
It can be very meaningful too.
That's a very good point. I totally, with having the technology, even doing what we're doing right now, with the people that can't travel or they're overseas or something, having the Zoom calls or whatever platform, because it's about coming together to support the family in their time of loss.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you again, David. I always learn something with our conversations, and I want to thank you very much for your willingness and coming in and talking today and being my honored guest on the Peaceful Passages show. And I want to thank you all for joining in and look forward to seeing you again on our next episode. Take care and shalom.